Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Matt Hamilton. I'm Director of Leeds Civic Trust. I'm delighted to welcome you this morning. This final lockdown lowdown interview, the final one of the series. And this morning we're talking to Andrew Cooper, who is the CEO of the Leeds Business Improvement District. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Martin. Thank you very much for inviting me today. Appreciate the opportunity.
We're pleased to have you here. So the way these interviews work, I've got a series of questions that I'll be putting to Andrew. Hopefully, I'm sure we'll be learning quite a lot of interesting things about how things have gone in the Business Improvement District area, the city centre, and how we come out of COVID, particularly with reference to the city centre. There is also, of course, the chat function on Zoom, so please feel free at any time to submit a question or a comment, and I will try and collect those in and put those to Andrew as we go along. We've got 45 minutes, or just less than 45 minutes, quite a lot to get through. So without further ado, I'm going to start and ask Andrew a very straightforward opener, which is, Andrew, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and about business improvement districts and about the one in Leeds? What do you actually do?
Absolutely. So business improvement districts you'll find across the world. They started in Canada in the 1960s. They went south to America. You'll find them in the UK. How's my sound coming through? Because I've got some challenges with my environment in terms
of... It seems okay to me.
You're hearing me okay? That's good. So yeah, business improvement districts started in America. They didn't come across to the United Kingdom until 2003. And there are now 320 business improvement districts across the United Kingdom. They are not for profit. They're non-political organisations that are about places. So you can find bids in city centres like Leeds, LS1, or you can find them on trading estates, or you can actually find them across a number of specific geographical areas like a coastal area or across boundaries as well. So they're a very nimble way of businesses coming together. You have a levy that's imposed upon, not imposed, it's actually mandated by the businesses themselves. They vote for it, and that's normally around 1%, and that generates income that is then spent back into the bid area. And I've got a quick slide, if I can throw this up on the PowerPoint. Here we go with the screen sharing. Here we go. So I'm going to share this screen, and if I can go back slightly to this slide here. So this shows the business improvement districts across the UK. So as I said, started in 2004. The first business improvement district was Kingston upon Thames, and then you can see across the way as the timeline increases, we get to 2015, and that's when Leeds BID was set up. Now, Leeds BID was one of the last major cities in the UK to have a business improvement district. So that's not a bad thing, because being late to the table, you can learn from those of you who have gone before. And then since then, we've had Cardiff, Belfast, Leicester, Harrogate, and if we go into Yorkshire itself, you can see the fact that there are, in 2010, there was just 2 business improvement districts in Yorkshire. There are now 17. So you can see those listed, and a number of bids that are in the process of being formed. So as I say, they're not-for-profit organisations, they're non-political, they're business-led, they're there to invest money back into a place for collective good. And that's what business improvement districts are all about. And I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment. There you go.
Thank you. So, Andrew, obviously, we've had 3 months, I think, pretty much to the day now of lockdown in the country and in Leeds. And the area where I suppose that has been most keenly felt is the city centre, because whilst we've all been able to walk and use local facilities, we perhaps haven't been going to the city centre much, and people have been working from home. So can you say a little bit about how the bid has actually been operating over the last 3 months? How in practical terms have you been able to keep going?
Sure. Well, lockdowns meant lots of changes for lots of people, hasn't it? I suddenly became the geography teacher, the PE teacher, and the RE teacher all in one go. But in terms of business-wise in the city centre, you're right. We had to follow government advice. We had to close a lot of our operation. In fact, 80% of my staff have had to be furloughed during this period of time. However, we have 2 offices in the city centre, two premises. One is in Victoria Quarter, well, that's in part of a shopping centre, and that closed down. But the other one is in City Exchange, and City Exchange supports, the accommodation there supports the street support team. This is the team that are dealing with homeless and vulnerable people on the streets of Leeds. And obviously, during lockdown, there was a need to support that particular group in terms of getting them into accommodation and making sure that they were safe and protected as well. So it was good that we were able to help and assist with that by having our office open in City Exchange to support that. But you're right, a lot of the city centre has been a ghost town. It's been just the essential shops that have been open, the supermarkets, Merrion Centre, a lot of Merrion Centre has been open to support those residents that are in the city centre who've obviously needed to get access to those vital services. And a lot of car parks as well, turning over their car parks to NHS staff and essential workers, and a lot of collaboration that's gone on and good spirit within the city centre to support the team effort, if you like, in terms of what has been an awful period of time. So yeah, the city centre has had changes that we've not seen before during that sort of lockdown period. But it's encouraging to see the fact that, we'll probably come on to that in terms of the 15th of June, when lockdown, particularly for non-essential retail, started, and we're starting to see the city centre open up again. And I think during that lockdown period, there's been a lot of uncertainty. There's been a lot of these sorts of calls, Zoom chats, where people who would normally just bump into each other and share stuff have had to sort of adapt and get themselves prepared for reopening up and best practice and what works and what doesn't work. And particularly those landlords, particularly in retail as well, who've really had to adapt. And we've seen the supermarkets, how quickly they adapted, and some of that best practice being passed on to the non-essential retail now that they've been open. And as customers and as consumers, we've sort of had to adapt as well in terms of getting used to it. And I think that is the key thing now going forward as people come out, emerge from lockdown, and getting used to the new norm in terms of how to get about the city centre, how to go about our daily business, which we've not been able to do before. So yeah, it's been personally an interesting time for me, but also for business-wise, we've had to adapt, and the bid has been open. We've been operational. I've had to reduce my street teams clearly because they've not been out there. But in terms of the bid itself, a lot of support to businesses, lots of questions, a lot of coming together. And I think that's a key thing. A lot of people that we wouldn't normally see collaborate and get around a table together have realised, well, if we all do this together, then Leeds is better for it. And that's what I've been witnessing during the lockdown period.
I mean, it's interesting. You say, what was the city centre like before? During lockdown and maybe prior to last week when there was a bit of a relaxation. Well, as you say, some businesses have been operational. The NHS, obviously, the hospitals and support services and care services have been in place. I mean, the Merrion Centre, of course. They have the national headquarters of Step Change, the national debt charity in Merrion Centre, and of course they've been operational throughout. So it's maybe some of these things that are slightly unseen by people that continue to operate, of course. But we did have the relaxation last week. Non-essential shops were allowed to open. Do you have any early feedback on how that sort of went?
I do, and I'm going to share my screen, and I think you got a flash of it earlier. Let's see if we can do that again. So what we're seeing now, this is Trinity, and you'll find a lot of the shopping centres have put measures in place. They've been on Zoom calls for the last 8 weeks or plus, chomping at the bit, putting stickers down, putting notices down, getting their staff trained, getting them ready. And as lockdown has eased and as non-essential retail has opened, we've seen a gradual coming back to normal. The first day, this is a graph that shows the red line there shows the 15th of June when lockdown was for non-essential was eased. We saw a lot of queuing on that day. We saw queues in Primark. Obviously, Primark doesn't have an online presence. So a lot of customers there going in. We saw queues in the Apple store and throughout the city centre. And then we've seen across the country, most places across the UK report a dip after that. So Tuesday, 62% of places across the UK reported a dip. And then we've seen it gradually build up again to the Saturday. And Saturday, while just to give you one example, Briggett, on Briggett alone, we're down 63.8% compared to this day last year. So that gives you some idea of the figures that we're down on. However, we have to take into account that places like Trinity are probably only 65% fully open, because the remaining 35% is hospitality and those businesses that can't yet open. So obviously we're waiting for the government announcement, which we believe will take place tomorrow, that will then give us the green light for a week on Saturday, the 1st of July, so that hospitality sector can support. So what we're seeing is a gradual reopening. We're seeing people behaving in a sensible way. We're not seeing any queue fights or anything like that, but we've seen a real sort of sensible approach to people coming back in the city centre. I'll throw some pictures up there. This is Saturday. This was Saturday around 11 a.m. So we can see crowds there. We can see people walking through. We can see on the third picture along, that's in the Victoria Quarter. So they've obviously set up a directional scheme of, if you're going down, then you go on the right-hand side. And if you're going up, you go on the left-hand side. And then on the far side, you see people there queuing outside of the Apple store in terms of collecting their latest products. And I believe they had 1,000 people over the past week have sort of pre-registered to collect things in advance of the shops opening. So it's been really encouraging to see that we've had no incidents. And in terms of the bid support of that, if you look at places across the UK, they've put in place queue ambassadors, and Leeds is no exception. We've as a city, the city council has put some funding together for queue ambassadors. There's about 12 of them on the streets. You'll see them in a blue tabard, a high vis vest. And that team is being managed, is being lent. We've lent Yvonne. Some of you will remember Yvonne. She was the team leader for our welcome ambassadors in our first term of our bid. Yvonne with the blonde hair, and she's been out there supporting this team as they get set up, and obviously need to be quite flexible in terms of where they go and where the hot spots are. But what we've seen is a very well managed process in terms of people coming back into the city centre, shops adapting, some shops putting some new technologies in there. So I've seen iPads that have been put on windows that almost have a red light and a green light. And then as you go in, there's a bit of a device that picks up how many signals, how many phone signals there are in the room. And when they get to, let's say their occupancy is 10, the iPad on the door turns red, so the person outside knows not to enter. So I think we're seeing from some retail some innovation, and we're seeing some ways to adapt to the current situation in a way that doesn't make the customer feel awkward. And I think that's the key thing. As people come back to the city centre, they don't want that awkwardness. They want to know what the new norm looks like and adapt to it accordingly. And on top of that, what we've done is to support that is to create a campaign to encourage people back into the city in a safe way. And do have a look at this. We've got the website there, Welcome to Leeds. It's been a real collaboration with people across the city. And what people want to know is all that sort of basic information that you want to get to grips with before you make your trip out to the city centre. An airline has sent me a YouTube video of what I will expect when I get to travel on their aeroplanes. And in terms of masks and how the process will be and so on. And they've done that in order to put me at ease as a consumer. And in the same way, we're putting stuff out there on this website to encourage people back, but to say we've thought things through. So one of the biggest questions are, will the toilets be open? Are the car parks operating? Is the bus station available? How do I navigate through that? which shops are open, because obviously people don't want to make their trip out and then realise that the shop that they want to go to isn't open yet, because some of the shops in Leeds are sort of open in a phased way since the 15th to the 4th of July. So all that information is on that portal, which is welcome to Leeds.co.uk. And I do have a short video, if that helps. It's only about sort of just over a minute or so long, Martin. It sort of give people an idea of what to expect when they go into the city centre. So let's see if it will work this time. I think it did before. So can you see that?
Yeah.
Here we go. There we go.
Thank you. Andrew, well, first of all, anyone listening in today who's maybe been to, anyone listening in today who's been into the city centre in the last week, please use the chat function. Let us know how you feel about it, how you've experienced it. What did you think? I think it'd be an interesting opportunity to get a bit of feedback from anyone that is currently either working or using the city centre. Andrew, it seems to me, and I think lots of people, that these changes that are in place to ease the way towards normality are nonetheless long-term functions. I mean, you know, we're not going to get back to where we were in February, it seems to me, for quite some time. So we may well be faced with social distancing for some time to come. The various measures that are being put in place that you're providing as a bid and the council providing, and other agencies, are going to be in place for some time. I think one of the things that this maybe means is that the sorts of activities that Leeds BID has put into place, you know, physical festivals, events, showpiece events where people gather together, those sorts of things may be problematic in future. The Leeds International Festival obviously didn't happen this year. Are you thinking about different ways in which you can showcase the city, both to Leeds residents, but actually to you know, to people who might visit Leeds as a destination?
Absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head, because one of the things that is obviously so important to us pre-COVID was events and festivals which drive footfall into the city centre. Now, to do that in the current climate would be seen as irresponsible and obviously isn't legal. So when I was on a call with over 100 places, excuse me, in the United Kingdom, and they were saying what's left in terms of events this year, and it's pretty much their Christmas markets and Christmas. Some of them might have autumnal events, things like light nights or parades, and we have that, don't we, in Leeds, and we're not sure where that is at the moment. So these traditional events that we've relied on to drive footfall, we can't do in the short term. We're hopeful and optimistic that we can do them in the future, and things like the summer dinosaur trail for the youngsters, we've obviously had to put on hold this year. That was all ready to go, and the businesses have said to us, please hold on to that, but do it in 2021, and hopefully we can adapt it accordingly. Interestingly, that particular event does have a digital element to it as well as a physical element to it. So as you just said, Martin, is there ways of adapting events to make them dual purpose and to make their reach further and to make them maybe go on a bit longer? Whereas if you've got an intense event that just happens for one day, we may have to think, well, how do we make that last over a week or a fortnight so everyone gets the opportunity to see it if people can't congregate in the way we would like to previously. So yeah, and I think as well we've seen events where it's a combination of physical and digital, and I think that will be innovation will start to come forward in terms of how we do that. The only other the event that I can see happening, or hope I'm not tempting fate, is maybe a bus tour for the Leeds United team at some point before when the season finally ends, if it ends, and that would be quite good. But other than that, a lot of events and festivals for this year, there just isn't the time now to plan and put them in place. So a lot of people are considering what events will look like into 2021 and beyond, and adapting and using best practice from across the world. You mentioned earlier, Martin, about the Leeds, the importance of driving people into Leeds. And I guess what we're seeing as well is how important the Leeds pound will be to our own economy, because we won't have the visitor numbers that we've had in previous years. We won't have maybe the influx of maybe students who have visited or looking for places and so on. So the importance of, as we welcome back people safely to Leeds, is that the Leeds people themselves use the resources that are here, i.e. the city centre, in order to sustain it through this economic challenging times. And I was chatting the other day to a colleague in Oxford Street, and obviously they're predicting that 50% of their income comes from abroad. I mean, we're not quite at that stage, but they're estimating a 2-year recovery period before they get that back. I think we rely more on the local and regional markets and some visitor markets internationally and nationally. So I think we've got to box clever, and we've got to welcome people back in order to sustain our city centre and future-proof it. And we've got to do that in some innovative and creative ways.
Just picking up on some of the items on the chat here, Garance asks about the pavement widening in the hedgerow and when that's going to be finished, because clearly this pandemic has taken place right in the middle of some fairly major infrastructural changes in the city centre. Do you have any information about progress on that?
I don't have information about the hedgerow, although I'm sure we can find that out. But what's happening across the country is, because of lockdown, engineers and street engineers have been able to crack on with stuff probably faster than they first thought. Now, I know the hedgerow started November 19, didn't it? It was for 72 weeks. So maybe that will be brought forward. I noticed the other day that Greek Street, there were on sort of completion phase, it looked pretty good in terms of their surface. So I think what this has enabled the local authority to do is to accelerate some of those projects, and also maybe to adapt, because there has been some funding for reopening the high street safely, and there's been other pots of money that the government has given out. So that may benefit us as a city centre in terms of some of the public realm. So what we don't really want to see in the long term is hideous red and white bollards, although necessary in the short term to get us over this. Maybe long term coming up with more solutions about planters and landscaping within the city centre, because we know we've had a challenge of not having as many green spaces in the city centre. So maybe some opportunities there during these sort of highways works and public rail improvements, that some of those might have to adapt to respond to the current environment. There's a few more questions coming in.
Yeah. Let me just try and mop some more of these up. Some really good points being made. So, oh yes, just in terms of promoting the what we have in the city centre in terms of retail. Lisa is saying we also need to promote our independents, Kirkgate Market. So I think the clip that you showed us was primarily about shopping, the chains and shopping centres. But clearly, there's a need as well, isn't there, to bring people back in to use the independent retail.
Absolutely. And I think the business improvement district is about all businesses in the city centre, although not all businesses pay for the business improvement district. And the smaller businesses, Kirkgate Market, we work closely with the market, and I stopped the video before it finished. They were on that as well. They started during lockdown. They kept open during lockdown. They closed at 3. They've closed later. More businesses have opened, and we're very busy again over the weekend. The smaller independents needing that support in terms of opening up and putting those stickers and distancing measures in place. Interestingly, again, the council, all credit to them on the social distancing pavement stickers. They're available to any independent retailer, so they can just call the BID, call the council. We can get those to them. So again, there is support to those different sectors. We host a weekly webinar, which is called Welcome Back to Leeds. And last week we had specifically talking about hospitality and those businesses that aren't back yet. Lots of questions coming forward then about licensing, and police were involved and the licensing team were involved. So people asking those questions. So businesses of all sizes, we need to work together to support each other as we start to reopen the city centre.
Andrew, one of the things I've kind of noticed during the last 3 months is that you sort of see what someone else is doing. You think, well, we could do that. That's why we're doing these interviews, because someone else was doing some interviews. I thought, actually, that's a really good way of engaging with people in Leeds. So I think sometimes there's an opportunity for organisations to take a bit of a lead and to take a bit of a punt. And actually, you're losing less than you would do in normal circumstances. Online things are much more inexpensive to do than arranging a big event where no one turns up because they're worried about the social distancing. So just picking up on a couple of comments here, Millennium Square could be maybe laid out with benches that are socially distanced and things could be held there. Something I personally would support is the council bringing forward its proposals to close City Square, which of course is on the cards over the next 2 or 3 years. Another big city centre space that could be used for events. So, maybe there's an opportunity for the BID to try something as soon as the regulations allow in some of these spaces, and then that will encourage others. I've got a comment here from Becky about Leeds International Film Festival. That could be done online. Actually, could it even be done outside? Could it be a driving type of arrangement or something? So on this big screen in Millennium Square. So, what do you think about that? Sort of trying things out experimentally.
It's a bit like somebody who you send on secondment and they become a permanent member of staff, isn't it? It's a similar thing, that we need to try these things and take a punt, as you say, give it a go, see if it works. And I think, as we've seen in Lithuania, where their square area has been handed over to restaurants and cafes to expand their trading space, because they obviously can't do that safely within their premises, or their numbers are so low. And we've seen in Amsterdam where they've put greenhouses next to a restaurant. So in effect, you can, as a couple, if you're going for a romantic meal, you can go into one of these little greenhouses. That means you're COVID safe, but it's a sort of lit up that particular street in Amsterdam. So I think there's opportunities to maybe experiment, to close streets, to make it more pedestrian friendly, to work collaboratively with the highways team and the local authority to say, some of the things that we've not done in the past or been frightened to do, maybe we can do that now under that sort of experimental heading and see if it works or not. And I think there's some great opportunities, like the lady said about the benches in Millennium Square or the film festival outside, or let's try and do things different and be bold, and let's not follow, let's lead. And as a city, I think there's some great opportunities here to do things that are innovative and different. And we're a very creative city. And while this is all being very depressing, the last sort of lockdown, is this an opportunity for Leeds to show its true colours?
Jane's asking about when the theatres will be back in operation. I think the thinking is that they'll be one of the last groups of cultural organisations to come back, given the enclosed nature of theatres and the seating and all the rest of it. But again, there may be opportunities, and I'm sure the various theatrical institutions across the city are thinking about this, to do things out in the open air, maybe do things online. I know that theatrical productions are being filmed at the moment. I think there are actually some productions being filmed that are then going to be broadcast, not just previous productions, but actually putting things on almost as a kind of a film. So I think, maybe we've some time to wait for the theatre, but again, there are alternatives, aren't there? I think.
Absolutely. I think I was encouraged to read today that I think France, some of the cinemas and theatres are starting to open up. I'm not sure how far ahead or behind they are in terms of our own statistics here. But speaking to the entertainment sector, shall we call it, which, 51% of our city is retail and leisure. And so leisure is an important part of our offering. And obviously with the non-essential retail just opening, we've only got a portion of the offer open. So we need the restaurants, we need the First Direct Arena and the theatres open. But that's going to take some time, as you say. I think it's going to be a while because of the whole booking process and making it safe and what the distancing and putting measures in place. I agree with you. I don't think we're going to see that in the short term, certainly. Unlikely to see it this year unless there's some sort of creative ways that are introduced.
Lisa just asked about cycling and opportunities to there's been a bit of an emphasis on, don't use public transport unless you have to use the car, cycle if you can. Yeah. But our cycling facilities maybe could do with improvement. But just to say, Lisa, there was a consultation quite recently from Leeds City Council on various measures to temporary or trial measures to try and improve cycling and pedestrian routes across the city, not just into the city centre. And I think the council have now published their proposals on the Commonplace platform. So have a look at that. And actually, there are some really quite ambitious proposals to introduce semi-permanent cycle lanes, for example. I think Kirkstall Road's going to be the first one to come on stream, but lots of others. The A660 Offaly Road will be another one. So I think there are some things happening on the cycling and transport front. And some cycle is available online. Yeah.
And some inventive cycle parks. I know the new cycle racks have been purchased for the city centre, and some of the shopping centres that have had void units in them have converted them to cycle storage areas. So you sort of think, there's some innovative ways. And the other idea that's coming in is obviously you don't want to turn up to your workplace all in hot and bothered, having done a 10-mile bike ride, but you could drive potentially to park and ride sites and then cycle into the city centre, knowing that there's bike storage in the city centre. So that's another innovation.
Absolutely. Andrew, there's an issue here, isn't there, with there's almost a double whammy. I mean, the high street, the chain stores, city centres, the retail side of things has been taking a bit of a hit in recent years. Now we have people who have got even more used to buying things online, people who maybe have been working from home, and where our office sector in Leeds, when it finally fully reopens, may not open to a full complement of staff. It may be that some staff stay working from home permanently. So there is a danger anyway that the footfall from Leeds residents at any rate won't recover to previous levels, whatever happens. So what does that mean for our city centre? What does that mean for the way that it operates? What does it mean for what it is in terms of its functions?
I think there's going to be definitely some challenges ahead. You talk about the office sector, and that applies to about 40% of LS1 of the bid area. And there's some large statement buildings there that go with the brand names that are behind them, and that's an important part of their presence in the city centre, with its accounting firms and legal firms and so on. So they're an important part of our economy. But we know that they've worked quite well at home. We know that we rely on commuter towns to service those businesses, and those commuter towns have been restricted because of the public transport arrangements at the moment, with not being able to get the volume of numbers on there. So I think it's where it goes in terms of a positive. I'm trying to be as positive as I can here, in the fact that I personally think that the working from home shine soon wears off, and the amount of Zoom calls that you can cope with in a day is quite demanding. We miss, as human beings, physical interaction and socializing with people, and I think that over time that working from home scenario will become less appealing, although it might be a case of only working from home on a couple of days a week and being in the office for a couple of days a week and maybe being it. So I think there may be mix it up slightly for people. We're a very traditional city. We're a very 9-to-5 city, and not everyone's going to be able to get on the 8:15 and get into Leeds. So is this an opportunity for rethinking that and moving to a more continental style? I was chatting to someone the other day. He's a building surveyor. He would normally come in early. He would be on the building site with his workers. He's not been able to do that because it's not right. It's not best practice. So what's happened is he's staggered his shifts accordingly. He now starts work in the afternoon, so he can do his surveying and in his project management later in the day. Then he works from home in the morning. So he's adapted, but still coming into the city centre. And I think there'll be a need for people to adapt, and maybe there's an opportunity for the city to move away from that traditional 9-to-5. We often have that gap, didn't we, between the when shops closed and the evening economy, and if we're forced to sort of elongate our trading period because we can't accommodate the same amount of people, or the office accommodation land doesn't all come back at the same time, then maybe there's an opportunity there to move to a more sort of continental basis. So I possibly see I'm trying to be as positive as I can there in terms of looking at that. But at the moment, the travel is a real restriction on us, particularly to that sector. And our busiest shopping centre in the city is obviously the train station. And at the moment, there's about 7 people walking through it each morning. So, some of the shops in there were the busiest profit per square metre in the country. And obviously, until that travel arrangements can sort itself, then we're going to have to wait some time, aren't we, for that for the city to adapt. But I think on your point earlier about City Square and some of those other projects, I think it is an opportunity to look at some of that public realm stuff as well, and how that interfaces with the train station and with the transport infrastructure that we need as a city centre, going back to some of the green points and the sustainable points that we need as a city centre. But it's going to change. So yeah, we need the office sector, but I think it's not going to come back as quickly as we think. A lot of them are saying September. I mean, I'm talking to staff and businesses where their children are obviously at school. Schools have been restricted, and again, I noticed today that in France, it's mandatory for every school child to go back for 2 weeks to finish their education to the end of their term. Obviously, we haven't got that until September. So a lot of the office sector are seeing September as their start because it aligns with going back to school. So we'll have to see what September brings.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think there is this challenge. I think the challenge really is around social distancing and what that means for office layouts and how long that will last. And even, if we go to 1 metre, it's still quite a restriction. And actually, in a way, 1 metre doesn't mean very much in terms of sort of office spacings, because it's not just about being a metre away from someone, it's about, do you face them and all those sorts of things. And when you start to look at those issues, and you look at the way our office space has been developed to hold a certain number of people. I raised this point last week with a developer. Developers aim to make a certain amount of money based on the size of their buildings, and if fewer people are in the buildings, then maybe there isn't as much business going on, and so the rents won't be as high, and that could be an issue. Yeah. And Andrew, we've got 3 minutes left, and I just wanted to cover a couple of very quick things. So, learning from others. Is there a sort of a bid network, not just in the UK, but actually learning from some of the countries where they're further down the line on COVID-19?
Definitely. I get a sense that in the UK we've been hard hit, and surely we should have benefited from this in terms of going last. We've been one of the last to come out, and I fear sometimes on some things we haven't, and that's just an observation. I think there's been some benefit, certainly from speaking to the businesses in Leeds, where they've got brands and a presence abroad. For example, Hammerson's that own Victoria, a lot of French connections, international connections. So they've actually said, this is what's happening in our other centres. We've noticed that after lockdown, our footfall has been this. We've put these measures in place. And then Leeds has been able to take learnings from that. Brands such as Primark that are international, their managers been on our calls and saying this is what's happened in other countries and this is what our experiences has been. So we've tried to tap into that, and I think that's been really important. Land Security is another one that own, obviously in the city centre, own Trinity. I noticed in the business news that they had a leisure investor put £50 million into them during lockdown. So we can see that maybe they're realising that leisure is important to their mix in terms of what the future holds. In terms of best practice, I sit on the council, and I chaired for the year, and I'm vice chair now of the BID Foundation, which sits within the Institute of Place Management. So that the Institute of Place Management is worth a look at. If for those you into your urban geography, that's a good resource in terms of what's happening across the world, and we tap into that in terms of webinars, what's happening elsewhere, and what we can learn from that. And the government have issued their support of business improvement districts through one of their announcements. That's they recognise that the bids are there and play an essential part in sort of recovery, and because we can be nimble and we can adapt. And the other thing pre-COVID was the government announced the High Street Task Force. And that was a big pot of money to help struggling high streets pre-COVID. And that's been almost repurposed, because there's going to be even more of an importance now to support high streets. And that's got best practice and experts and looking at how the recovery process, learning from places across the world, not just what we've learned from in the UK. So yeah, those networks are really important in terms of not falling down any potholes of things that haven't worked, but also learning what has worked and applying that to Leeds. And we're seeing that in some of the people who come around the table and sharing that. As I said at the beginning of the call, it's really encouraging and heartening to see that people who would normally keep their cards close to the chest are not doing that, because they realise that this is going to benefit our city, and therefore there's a need to collaborate and work together. Really? And that's what the bid is all about, because we have no agenda other than the 5 letters of our city, and therefore we can almost enable and be a catalyst to some of that discussion and make that happen.
The bid was renewed recently, wasn't it?
It was.
So and you set out your stall at that time for how your vision of what the bid would do in Leeds over the next few years. I guess this is the final question, and we've probably covered some of this, but I mean, if you were to reconsult now, if you were to have held that election, the vote, if you like, to continue the bid next week, what would you have changed in terms of setting out your stall?
So yeah, you're right. We have to, by law, go for a vote every 5 years. And we had a 94% endorsement, which was one of the highest of any bid in the UK for a second term bid. So that gives us a mandate to go forward for the next 5 years. But what the beauty of a business improvement district is that it can be nimble and it can adapt. And whereas for certain projects, that sometimes they're fixed, and you can only do this certain thing. With a bid, we can be nimble with our headings. We had our headings about ambition, about the curation of the city centre, animation, collaboration, and innovation. And I think all of those things fit into our current situation now. And I think what the board have asked, obviously, there's that initial, people have shut their doors. We have got levy coming in, which is good, and we've seen that across the UK. We've had an injection of funding from the government as well, because they realised the importance of bids, and we've also had some of the funding in to support us. So I think we can repurpose our business plan. Our business plan is called The Next Chapter, and it goes from 2020 to 2025. But we're going to have to be a bit nimble in adapting some of those things to respond to what businesses want from us right now. And I think what we're seeing is a real need to get back to basics, and bids were set up for that clean, safe and friendly agenda. The Americans would call it the clean, safe and safe and friendly. And we're seeing that in terms of the sanitisation of the city centre, the importance of our ranger team, cleansing and getting the city centre clean and reassuring people on that front. And that's a service that's available to all businesses in the city centre on a daily basis. They're operational now. And I guess the second part of the bid, really important this time, is that fundamental sort of basic information that people are looking to see, hence the Welcome Back to Leeds campaign. And again, encourage people to get behind that. There'll be videos, there'll be social content there. And so we've already had to nimbly adapt to what we were setting out to do. So we haven't been able to do a festival, as you said, or we've not been able to do a dinosaur trail. So how do we repurpose that investment to make it more relevant to what businesses need now? And we can do that, and we can do that very, very quickly and without any fuss. And I think that's important as people come forward and say there's a real need here. Can the bid help, and can the bid fund, or can the bid project manage? Yes, we can do that.
Andrew, we're out of time, I'm afraid.
It's been good talking to you.
It's been a really good chat. I hope everyone's enjoyed that. We've covered quite a lot of ground there, and thanks also for putting some images up on the screen, which I think has really helped us to understand the situation we're in Leeds City Centre, and your role actually in helping businesses and businesses to come out of it, but also to actually ensure that people that need to use those businesses do so in a safe way. So thank you very much, Andrew. Just to say, we're going to be issuing these interviews very soon on Vimeo. So if there's anything that Andrew said that you didn't quite catch, you can replay them. And that goes for all the other ones that we've done throughout this month. But yes, Andrew, that was really good.
No problem. I've just popped in the chat for everybody our email address. So if people want to follow up on any of those points, inquiry@leedsbid.co.uk. And the hashtag for the campaign is Back to Leeds. And the website is welcometoleeds.co.uk. That's
brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Andrew. Thank you to you all. Hope you have a good afternoon, and see you all soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Martin. Cheers. Bye now.